All right, everybody. It's me, Dr. Kaz, and this is that supplemental video that I just kind of wanted to finish up the material with. I know we kind of went over a little bit, but again, these first couple chapters have a lot of material, plus with the learning strategies and whatnot. I wanted to get into this material in a little bit more detail, so this kind of gives me a little bit more time. So I want to talk about macromolecules, because when we talk about the organization, when we're dealing with anatomy and physiology, we start really small and then we build up to larger things. For example, we're starting off with atoms, then we go to molecules, and now we're going to go to macromolecules. And eventually, then that will move us into cells. And then when we take a bunch of cells and throw them together, then we get tissues. Then we get some tissues. They can be same or different. Then we get organs, and then we group a bunch of organs into a system, and then we take a whole bunch of systems and group them into an organism, and that's what us. That we're studying, that's what we are going to be. We are that organism that we are studying for this class. So we're going to move on the level of organization and talk about macromolecules. And basically what a biological macromolecule is, well, macro means big, so that's large. All right, and then when we're talking about biological, that's organic. So we're going to talk about large organic molecules that are made by the body, okay? And they're going to always have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is interesting because earlier today in our earlier slideshow, we saw that carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and I'm missing one, and I can't remember what the other one was. Oh my gosh, awful. Are going to be one of the many substances that we're going to discuss in our body this semester. All right. We can also attach some nitrogen, some phosphorus or sulfur molecules onto these macromolecules, but we're always going to deal with these carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. All right. So when we're talking about carbon skeletons, all right, we're going to deal with something that's going to have a carbon, because according to chemists, all right, if you have carbon anywhere in your molecular formula, you are going to be considered an organic molecule. So if carbon is present, you're going to have an organic molecule. So carbon skeletons are going to have carbon, but they can have other things as well. Like, for the example, hydrocarbons are going to have only carbon and hydrogen atoms, all right? And then we'll also deal with functional groups, and these functional groups will help to give certain properties to whatever molecule that we're talking about. So when we're dealing with acids, for example, all right, we'll have a functional carboxyl group attached to them. If those structures have a base, like bases here, all right, that their functional group will be an amine group, okay, because amine will contain nitrogen there, right? So a lot of these are going to be polar functional groups, right, and we'll also have a hydrogen bond somewhere in there involved. All right, so let's break it down. I really want to get into the different types of macromolecules, and the first classification, or the first class I want to talk about, are lipids, okay? Lipids, when you think of lipids, I want you to think of fats. And I also want you to think of something that's water insoluble. What does that mean? That means when you put this substance into water, it will not dissolve, all right? Much like when you pour oil into water, when you're boiling pasta, for example, and if you want to add some oil to it so it doesn't get sticky, right, you'll notice the oil kind of just, it doesn't separate, it just kind of congeals on the top. And I want you to think of an oil as a liquid form of fat, okay? At room temperature, when fats cool down, they become more solid, all right? But when they're in a liquid form, all right, that means that they're going, I want you to think of them as an oil, okay? So some of the functions of lipids are going to be, all right, stored energy, cushioning, insulation. We're going to find these lipids in our cell membranes, all right? So when we learn about cell membrane components in chapter 4, you're going to see where these lipids come from. And then huge classification or function of lipids is going to be for hormones. All right, I tell folks all the time, cholesterol is good. You want cholesterol. It's one, because you need it to make hormones. It's one of the backbones for when we're building up hormones. All right, but cholesterol is involved also as one of the components into your plasma membrane, and that it helps to your plasma membrane to withstand temperature changes, extreme temperature changes. So when we talk about lipids, we have 4 classes: triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and eicosanoids. All right. So when we're dealing with, and we'll talk through these primary classes throughout the semester, all right, triglycerides, you really want to think of energy, okay? Your body loves to use triglycerides as energy. Phospholipids are an important component to the cell membrane, the plasma membrane, okay, called the phospholipid bilayer, right? Steroids, again, we'll see those in the formation of our hormones. All right, eicosanoids are going to be locally, all right, locally acting hormones. All right, so when you damage cell membrane, you probably heard of like prostaglandins, prostacyclines, thromboxanes, and whatnot. Those are going to be, all right, locally acting chemicals that, if, for example, if you damage your cell membrane, you'll invoke the inflammatory response and you'll form these chemicals through what we call an enzymatic cascade. An enzymatic cascade is when you start with product X, let's say, all right, and you turn it into product Y. Well, we put an enzyme to break it down or change it from X into Y. Okay, and then we go from product Y to product W, and it undergoes a series of chemical reactions that takes us all the way from X to W, but there's certain steps along the way to get us there, and we need enzymes to do that, certain ingredients, certain components. All right, and the enzymes are just basically a protein that help to catalyze or to get a chemical process underway, which we'll actually talk about here in a moment when we get to proteins. All right, so think of eicosanoids as locally acting hormones. And I'm trying to write this out with the mouse, but it doesn't work. All right, so you'll talk more about that throughout the course and in Bio 211, something to give you to look forward to. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates used to be the thing when I was growing up, when I was in college. Everybody's like, your diet should mainly consist of carbohydrates. Now, it's like the redheaded stepchild. And no offense to any of you that are redheads. I am, so I understand. All right, but it's one of those things that carbohydrates, when it comes to nutrition, aren't as popular as they once used to be. They're gaining a little bit more popularity here, but again, just like with anything in moderation. So when we're dealing with carbohydrates, we're going to be dealing with these macromolecules that are going to have, from a chemical standpoint, either an H, all right, they're going to have a hydrogen attached to the carbon, and they're also going to have an OH group attached to each carbon. All right, so every carbon is going to have, so here's our carbon, and then it's attached to another carbon and attached to another carbon. All right, but then you'll have a hydrogen ion attached to it, and then hydroxide, or an OH group. And it changes in configuration quite a bit. You can have H and OH. You can have an OH up to the top. Okay. Point being is, when we're talking about the molecular formula, the chemical formula for carbohydrates, this is the basic formula: CH2O. And then in parentheses, and then the outside is N. So N is just going to say how many carbons, and then you can just plug and play. So if you remember anything from math, if you took math, CH2 and then O, all right, and the subscript is N. So if we have 6 carbons, for example, then I can rewrite this equation as C6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 hydrogen, and then 6 times, always assume that there isn't a number after a letter, that there's a 1 there. Okay, so this would be 1, this would be 1. So 6 times 1 is 6. So O6. Okay, So that's what the actual chemical formula would be. Point being is, when we're getting into the macromolecules of carbohydrates, we have different classifications. And the three that we're going to deal with are monosaccharides, meaning one, mono is one, and those are simple sugars. Okay? Disaccharides is when we take two monosaccharides and stick them together. And so now we have disaccharides. Now what happens when we take 50 monosaccharides and string them together? Then we get polysaccharides, many. So let's talk about, all right, some of our popular monosaccharides. All right, probably the most popular monosaccharide is glucose. Okay, your body loves glucose. Well, your brain does. Nervous tissue loves glucose. Loves it, loves it, loves it. All right, 6-carbon carbohydrate. Okay, and it is the primary nutrient for supplying energy to our cells. Cells love glucose. They gobble it up. Okay, so that's why it is so important that you maintain a certain amount of glucose in your blood. Hence, low blood sugar, high blood sugar, low blood sugar and insulin, right? High blood sugar and insulin, that sort of thing. Okay, so your blood sugar levels, which is primarily glucose, are carefully maintained. Now, if I have a high blood glucose level and I am just going to be sitting on the couch, your body's like, well, heck, I don't want to waste that. I don't want to, just get rid of all that delicious, beautiful blood glucose. I'm going to store it. And I'm going to store it in the form of a polysaccharide. What's a polysaccharide? Polysaccharide is many monosaccharides. Okay, that's cool. So I'm going to take all my monosaccharides and I'm going to string them together. And I'm going to make this big, long molecule. Okay, and that's called glycogen. Glycogen is the stored form of glucose. So when you have a lot of blood glucose just floating around, your liver and your skeletal muscles are going to undergo a process called glycogenesis. Let's dissect that word. Glyco means glycogen. Genesis means to make, build, create. Okay? So your liver and your skeletal muscle is going to decide, I'm going to make glycogen. So I'm just going to take one glucose molecule, attach it to a glucose molecule over here. Hey, wait, there's another glucose molecule. I'll take that and stick that on. Hey, there's another one. And it makes this big, long string of glucose molecules. Okay? And so we're taking these individual glucose monomers and we just start to string them together. And we call that glycogenesis. So we put that glycogen in stored form in the liver and skeletal muscle. You need to know that. Liver and the skeletal muscle are going to be the organs, all right, that undergo the process of glycogenesis. They will store glucose there. So now, I'm going to go run a marathon, and I need to get energy from that stored glycogen. Okay, no problem. The liver is going to break down that glycogen. We call that hydrolyzation. Okay? So the actual process is called glycogenolysis. So here, let's dissect it. All right? Glycogen is going to be our product. We're going to break down glycogen. All right? And when we say lysis, lysis means to break down. So glycogenolysis means, hey, we're breaking down glycogen. All right? We have these individual, all right? Well, here's our string of glucose monomers. We just strung them along. Whee! And this whole molecule is glycogen. Okay? So us putting that together is called glycogenesis. When I want to start chopping off glucose monomers, that's glycogenolysis. Okay? But now let's just say, all right, I was irresponsible and I didn't make enough glycogen. No problem. Guess what? The liver can make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. What does that mean? Well, guess what? I can make glucose from fatty acids. I can make glucose from proteins. Hoorah! That's cool. How do I do that? Great question. Through the process of gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, so new glucose formation, creation. Okay, gluconeogenesis, only done in the liver. That's why it's important to have a healthy liver. It's important to have a healthy liver. You can see all that it does. Okay, let's talk about proteins. I'm going to tell you something right now, and I have the luxury of being able to tell you this because I teach several classes here at Greenville Tech, and I get the foresight and the hindsight, all right, of seeing what's coming and what is past. And this slide, if you do me a favor, and I can memorize one slide per chapter, I hope you could do more. Memorize this slide. This slide is going to follow you through the rest of this course and the rest of 211. Okay, you need to know the functions of proteins. You need to know. Okay. So I'm going to run through them real quick. A catalyst, all right, we call these catalyst enzymes. That's like a lighter to a fire. You want to start a fire, all right, burn some wood and some paper boxes, no problem. You need a catalyst. Well, for our situation, we'll use a lighter. In your body uses enzymes, okay? They help with chemical reactions, so we can have these metabolic chemical reactions if we need to build something or break something down. Defense. What the heck does that mean? Well, guess what? We hear a lot about antibodies floating around in our bodies during this whole COVID thing. Well, what do you think antibodies are? They're proteins, right? Transport. You're going to learn how awesome, all right, the proteins are for transport because you need to get things in and out of your cell. Well, your cells are clever enough to create what we call transport proteins, which are basically channels and pumps. All right, and that allows things to enter into the cell or exit the cell. Okay, well, structural support. Well, we make proteins to help with that. Right, in our muscles, we have our actin and myosin. Those are our contractile proteins. Right, for structure and support. But you also have a cytoskeleton. Just like our body has a skeleton to help give us support, our cells have a cytoskeleton, and they use proteins to help build this cytoskeleton. All right. Also, those proteins will help with the cytoskeleton when we make what we call microtubules, and that helps with movement inside the cells. Okay? Regulation and storage we'll get into in more detail here, all right, later on, but you'll see the functions of how proteins will help to regulate certain processes, biological processes in the body, all right, especially when we get into like replication of cells and whatnot. That's going to be later on down the road there. So like I said, this slide is very important if you really want to understand, all right, the function of proteins here. All right, so what's the general protein structure? Well, first of all, you need to know that the building block for proteins are amino acids. So similar to like how we saw with glucose and glycogen, right, we stuck a bunch of glucose molecules together and we got the molecule glycogen. If we start to string amino acid monomers together, individual amino acids, we start to stack them together, we can start to build proteins, okay? So there's 20 different amino acids that are found in us as living organisms. And each of these amino acids, on one end of the amino acid, you're going to have an amine group, kind of function like a base, right? And at the other end of our amino acid will be our carboxyl group, all right? That's going to be like the acid portion, all right? So what we'll see is that this amine group and the carboxyl group are going to be, we just learned about covalently bonding, all right? These groups will each be bonded to a carbon atom right next to them, okay? And then it depends on how many carbon atoms are there scattered throughout, all right? But they'll be covalently bonded to other atoms, like a hydrogen atom, all right, or different side chains. And again, it's not really important, but these side chains will help to distinguish one amino acid from another, okay, which gives us that 20 different amino acid classification. All right, that's it for proteins. Last macromolecule that I want to talk about are going to be our nucleic acids, okay? So when you think of nucleic acids, I want you to think of genetic information, okay, in the form of DNA and RNA, okay? Their job, all right, these nucleic acids are to store and transfer that genetic information in our cells. Because think of it, when we want to make proteins, we need to consult. Think of the DNA as like your blueprint to your body, a map, okay, structural layout. And all that genetic information is kept stored in the DNA. So when it's time to make stuff, we refer to the DNA, we look at it and be like, oh, okay, that's how we're going to make it. All right, then we need some help, all right, with the RNA, because the RNA is going to help build the proteins, okay? So DNA is the double-stranded nucleic acid. It looks like a ladder that we just twisted. So here's your ladder, all right, with your rungs. And all we're going to do is we're going to twist it, all right, from end to end. And this is going to look horrible. It's not even going to look good. Kind of twisting it. And we get that double-stranded helix formation here, okay? Now, DNA is mainly found in the nucleus of the cell, but believe it or not, we do have some in the mitochondria. If you don't know what the mitochondria are, for right now, just know that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Your job is to make energy. And you'll get to learn about that in chapter 4, okay? So any DNA that comes from the mitochondria, you get from your mommy, okay? That's maternal DNA, only comes from mommy, okay? RNA, all right, also will be found in the nucleus, but also within the cytoplasm of the cell. And again, if you're not quite sure what the cytoplasm is, all right, think of the cell, okay, as an envelope. Okay, so you have that envelope that holds a letter, okay? And that letter will have writing on it, okay? And some of that writing will be that nucleic or the RNA, all right? Some of that's found, all right, if we look here, real simplistic drawing, here's a cell. At the center of the cell is the nucleus, okay? Much like an egg has a yolk, the yolk is the nucleus, all right? And the shell of the egg is going to be your plasma membrane, and then the white portion in between the yolk, all right, and the egg shell, that's the cytoplasm, okay? All right, last but not least, I do need to mention this molecule here, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And the important thing about adenosine triphosphate is that this molecule is the cell currency for energy, okay? So when you hear ATP, you need to think of, all right, this is what my cell uses for energy. And the last part, the adenosine triphosphate, tri means that there's 3 phosphates attached, all right, onto, all right, the nucleotide. So the adenosine is the nucleotide, so we're just going to draw it like a square. And then you've got 1 phosphate, 2 phosphates, and 3 phosphates. And there's these bonds in between these phosphates that are high energy bonds, okay? This last bond is a very high energy bond. So when we snap that bond, energy is given off, all right? And that phosphate just kind of floats away. And ATP turns into ADP, which stands for adenosine diphosphate, all right? But when we snap that bond, that energy is released for metabolic processes, all right? If we need to make something, if we need to break something down, okay? Point being is, all right, it's important that you understand that these last 3 phosphate groups, that last phosphate group, all right, is going to have a high energy bond. All right, the next one in, this bond right here, it has a high amount of energy too, all right, but it won't have as much as the last one did. Okay. All right, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about that I didn't get a chance to talk about earlier. I didn't want to rush through anything. But at the same time, I just kind of wanted to finish up chapter 2 in regards to the biological macromolecules. So next chapter is going to be chapter 4. Chapter 4 is going to have quite a bit of information in regards to cell anatomy. And so I really urge you to get ahead of it and start studying that now before the next session. Okay, you'll be doing that with Dr. Seiler. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. All right, I will send this out because this is not part of your chat session assignment. Okay, so I will email this out to you folks, and then once the other chat session assignment has been completed and past the due date, then I can send out the other chat session. Okay, so you can review it and watch it as much as you'd like, if you'd like to. All right, I hope this helped. It was really nice meeting you folks, and I look forward to our next session in 2 weeks. All right, have a good night now, or a good day.